Poppy Playtime is the most popular indie game out right now. That's not even really a question anymore, more like a fact. The game has released just 2 chapters thus far, and from 1 subscriber to 100 million, everyone has covered this game on their YouTube channels. But today, despite this game's crazy success, it has been recognized from 2 separate corners. On one hand, people compliment this game's uniqueness aside from a genre of horror that has been seen as generic up until this point, and on the other hand, some people see this game as a money scheme, or at least a game that comes from a group of people seen as harmful to the environments that brought them their own success. This is the controversial rise of Poppy Playtime by Mob Games. So Poppy Playtime itself has had a crazy development process before the first chapter even ended up releasing. And it all starts with 2 YouTube channels, one by the name of Examination and the other named Enchanted Mob. I won't go into the history of both of these channels too much, however these 2 YouTube channels make incredibly similar content. In fact, as of right now they create the exact same content, uploading their videos to both of their channels collaboratively. But to give some context, the Examination channel contains 2 animators by the name of Micah and Zach, and the Enchanted Mob channel includes 2 other animators named Seth and another Zach. These channels for a while now have built a reputation in the animation community that has been relatively positive. The animation/music videos have a lot of personality and the quality of them are incredibly high. This could be due to the fact that Enchanted Mob in particular have excelled not only in their animation skills, but also their networking abilities, since there are tons of animators that have been partnering up with them, hence the partnership with Examination. Anyway, while it's not clear how the game got organized, we know it started with the game director by the name of Isaac. Isaac recognized the oversaturated market of indie horror games, realizing that most games in the genre were criticized for being what some call walking simulators, or in other words, games that don't have much depth in their gameplay at all. And Isaac was interested in making something unique in this same field. And so Enchanted Mob and Isaac would get together to go from a YouTube channel to a full-blown game development company that would be named Mob Games. On May 9th of 2021, the Mob Games development company would create their own YouTube channel. And with the creation of the channel came the very first appearance of Poppy Playtime ever, with a video by the name of Poppy Playtime Maintenance VHS tape. The trailer's contents would show a character who we would learn to be named Poppy being maintained by what looks like a child. The maintenance instructions include brushing the Poppy doll's hair, along with shining her shoes. However, the final step in the tape would include the Poppy doll being dissected, revealing her lifelike attributes like blood. This tape was meant to give everybody a taste as to what Poppy Playtime was going to be about without revealing too much. The trailer felt more like an analog horror video than anything, but that's what made it immediately popular by the Enchanted Mob audience, those of which being fans of Enchanted Mob's horror game animations done previously, and so they were drawn towards the Circus Baby inspired character in Mob's own game. This was all that we would get from Mob Games' channel for the rest of the summer. The Enchanted Mob YouTube account would still continue teasing the game with in-character advertisements though, but it wouldn't be until September of that same year where we would get some new progressions with the Poppy Playtime game, and it would start with the trailer for the very first chapter. The first chapter's trailer headlined some minor gameplay mechanics, but it was clear that it was focused on the characters inside of it along with the environment, showing off returning characters like Huggy Wuggy and Brawn the Dinosaur. After this trailer was released, it would be met with a Kickstarter project for the game. The project was called Poppy Playtime, a horror game that's actually got gameplay, which plays back into the idea of it being a gameplay-oriented horror game. The Kickstarter detailed a lot of plans for Poppy Playtime before it was ever even released, highlighting mostly the game mechanics themselves, while also mentioning that the game would have multiple $5 chapters starting with an initial tech demo that would release shortly after. There were big ambitions of stretch goals and even creating a VR version of the game in the future if it was successfully funded. In the risks and challenges segment, the developers expressed fear that potentially the first chapter could do poorly, leading to difficulty creating chapters in the future. However, of course, this was a crowdfunding site, and therefore the developers were hoping to get patrons to give money to try and soften the financial blow making a game would be. So that meant that there were plenty of rewards to incentivize these donations, and they are as follows. For $5, you can get a copy of the first chapter. For $10, you can get the chapter along with a full entire soundtrack of chapter 1. The first 100 people to donate $25 would get their name in the credits of the game along with everything I just mentioned. Anybody to donate $50 would get the same rewards along with a background pack for the game. For $100, you could get your own fan-made drawings inside of the game. For $250, you could get your own toy designed and put in the game as a graphic. And finally, for $500, you could get that same toy with a full 3D render in the game, along with a sticker pack. The first hint of controversy would come around this time before the release of the game, and it roots back to this exact Kickstarter. People were pretty quick to point out that a lot of the rewards were actually relatively expensive. For example, $50 for a background pack or $100 to have a drawing inside of the game. They were pretty expensive, and this would end up reflecting in the successfulness of the Kickstarter, as the goal was to get $45,000 to fund the game, but they would only end up getting $222 with 16 backers. And within a month of the Kickstarter's release, it was such a failure that it was entirely canceled. However, even though this $4,500 was never acquired to fund the game, that didn't stop the development of the first chapter. In fact, when considering the initial date or arrival for the first chapter based on the Kickstarter was December of 2021, it actually came a bit early, as on October 12th of 2021, Poppy Playtime Chapter 1, or as they labeled it, the Poppy Playtime Tech Demo, was officially released to the public. The game seemed to initially have a rough start as mentioned, because the popularity of it was limited and it was only really shared among Enchanted Mob and Examination fans. Not to mention, it was clear that their initial projections for the amount of support they would get in the game were not met at all, so the release of the title was probably a pretty nerve-wrecking experience. But all of these nerves were immediately proven unwarranted, as right out of the gate, Poppy Playtime saw immense success. There were YouTubers like 8-Bit Ryan who would release full gameplay videos the same day the game was actually released, and this would only be the tip of the iceberg because within a week, even YouTubers like Markiplier were giving it a try. This is when the game would get some insane traction. And don't just take my word for it, look at the views. 18 million, 9 million, 5 million, 11 million, the list goes on. This game quickly rose to the top, and at basically an instant, it placed itself among the indie game greats like FNAF and Bendy and the Ink Machine. The first chapter was incredibly basic as it was just a tech demo, but it still brought a lot to the table in terms of potential. The game started off with us seeing a note telling us to return to the factory that we worked at years ago, and upon entering this factory, we equip ourselves with what is called a grab pack. And after exploring a bit, we run into the main antagonist of this chapter named Huggy Wuggy. After confronting him, we move on with our day and turn the power on through a basic puzzle to eventually see that Huggy Wuggy had actually gone missing. Frantically, we keep exploring the factory with small clues to Huggy's presence, and while the puzzle stayed simple, they showed some great ability to expand thanks to many features the grab pack mechanic opened up for the game. After completing the final puzzle of turning on and building a toy through a machine, we try to exit the room of the toy when we are met with the highlight of the chapter, the Huggy Wuggy chase scene. We panic and enter into the only safe place being the ventilation system, which at first seems to be a gift, but it slowly turns into a curse as we find ourselves crammed running from this giant beast coming from all different angles. Thankfully, we made it out alive, but before doing so, we used our grab pack to drop a box down on Huggy, slamming him into a railing where he proceeds to die. After this, we make our way to the game's exit and meet the real Poppy Playtime doll, which is where the chapter ends. It's pretty clear to see why this game blew up even from this little demo. It had recognizable and scary characters. It was great at not only scaring the player through jump scares and sudden surprises, but also by building a creepy atmosphere. And most famously, the game had a ton of hidden lore through things like videotapes and whatnot. I won't go into the lore really at all because it's more subject for another video, but for the most part, it's a pretty formulaic story of monsters somehow coming alive and attacking humans. But that's all the game really needed to get off the ground. Somehow, without the Kickstarter money that they said that they needed, they were able to make a game that was widely successful. And despite a $5 price tag, the game was something breaking over 1,000 players at once, which just shows you that people were incredibly interested in Poppy Playtime. All the way to this point, Poppy Playtime as a title was relatively respected. People like Ecker Coaster would be quick to call out Poppy Playtime for some of their shady past, but those things wouldn't be amplified until later, and the reputation of the game was sky high. And it was about as high as it ever would be, because from this point forward, Poppy Playtime began to make some mistakes, all starting with the one that is already in your head from the moment I said the word mistakes: Poppy Playtime NFTs. In December of 2021, the Poppy Playtime developers would officially announce what was seen as the reputation-turning piece of merchandising, that of which being their own set of NFTs, or as they tried to phrase it, digital collectibles. The NFTs included 6 different posters that could be purchased for $15 each. The incentive to buy these was to get different lore secrets that in the end would be revealed to leak the Chapter 2 main character. These NFTs were ridiculously hated, and I think we know why. People pointed out the harmful environmental effects NFTs would have, and another big problem with them is how a single piece of lore was being hidden behind multiple different price gates, and it was just pretty unfair to be asking for these items, especially since Poppy Playtime was targeting a younger audience. Because let's face it, coming from a content creator who frequently makes Poppy Playtime videos, no matter how many times they try to hide it, Poppy Playtime is a game that is directed at children. And NFTs were not a highly supported way of trying to get money for them because, as we would see very quickly, there would be so much backlash around this announcement that all traces from it for the most part would be entirely deleted. And while, as they would mention on their Discord server, they were legally binded to keep the NFTs up, all promotions of them were taken down. This would also be the point where some people would start to question the developers' morals themselves. Because amid this controversy, the CEO of Enchanted Mob, Zach Bellinger, would even say that all people who talked about the NFTs in his Discord server should be banned, which is showing not that he was remorseful of his actions, but rather that he was ashamed and was trying to cover his mistakes. But luckily for the developers, that was all the controversy for 2021, and a new year would quickly pass into 2022, where, let's just say, things would get a lot worse. But before discussing those things, there was a calm before the storm, because Poppy Playtime's second chapter was officially announced on 2/22/22, making it the second biggest thing to be released that day. This trailer ended up showing that Poppy Playtime was here to stay, as it would rack up over 50 million views in a few months of its release. This trailer advertised longer, more complex gameplay, along with a ton of different new enemies, including the as-teased new main antagonist by the name of Mommy Longlegs. This shot up Poppy Playtime to even new heights. But with those new heights came new waves of fans, as well as skeptical viewers on the outside who wanted to take a closer look into Poppy Playtime's development behind the scenes. A few days after the Chapter 2 trailer was released, Poppy Playtime began to be exposed at massive volumes. Mostly at first starting with Twitter threads showing tons of reasons why Poppy Playtime should not be supported, a lot of which calling back to things like this Ecker Coaster thread mentioned previously where he called Poppy Playtime out for copying his own game. But this time the story began to drive even deeper. People began to start recognizing Mob Games for being the same people behind a previous controversy with the same animation channel Ecker Coaster, where they attempted to bring him onto their own team like what they've been known for doing with other animators for a while. However, after Coaster declined this deal, things would turn hostile, and an old thread would come up of Coaster showing tons of different insults and threats Enchanted Mob of Mob Games were throwing at Coaster, allegedly for not wanting to be part of their animation team. These were things that had been highlighted before from people like Poseidon in his video called The Downfall of Enchanted Mob Examination back in 2021. However, with all these recent threads coming out, this video would gain more traction, and smaller YouTubers like Warp Studios were making extended breakdowns of these various different threads. A lot of people were aware of these allegations, but up until this point there were only slight mentions and they weren't gaining all that much traction. However, on the flip side, after this point, most famously, the YouTuber Dags would release a Poseidon-inspired full-blown 20-minute video documenting a lot of the shady past of Mob Games and the creation of their company. This video really began to spring the controversy of Poppy Playtime into a whole new dimension. People were quick to point out all sorts of other flaws with Poppy Playtime, like their excessive merch drops, which started to really turn some people against the company as a whole. But by far, the things that were sticking out to the people the most were the allegations by Ecker Coaster of consistent harassment and abuse. I even got the opportunity to interview Ecker Coaster to get some insight as to how he was feeling about the situation. But if this blow wasn't enough, in the next month, being March of 2022, Poppy Playtime would start to make mainstream highlights for incredibly negative reasons. News outlets started reporting to parents that they needed to watch out for Poppy Playtime, more specifically its main antagonist at the time, Huggy Wuggy, because his deceiving name was allegedly attracting children on social media to him, somewhat similar to the Momo Challenge hoax, and parents were alerted to the dangers this game was causing. One of the most horrific examples of the effect Poppy Playtime had was when a mother had claimed that her children were attempting dangerous acts after viewing Poppy Playtime content, saying, quote, "He got to the stage where he didn't know the difference between reality and gaming. He tried to climb up to my bedroom window, saying that he would die and come back to life, telling me that's how Huggy Wuggy does." I cannot exactly confirm or deny any of these allegations, especially with how incredibly strong they are. However, for the most part, the Poppy Playtime devs didn't really care that much, honestly, especially since news stations were hopping on on making weird and wild claims about the game that they called the Huggy Wuggy game. But while in terms of reputation, this didn't affect the Poppy Playtime fanbase that much, there was a definite large amount of parents who came across these articles and were quick to protect their children from this type of content, especially since parents were on high guard with the internet's contents, with this just being a few months after the popular show Squid Game was sharing headlines for the same reasons. All of this controversy was beginning to pile on, and it was really affecting the Poppy Playtime reputation. It also didn't help that YouTubers like Def King made their own videos against Poppy Playtime within just a couple weeks of Chapter 2's release date, driving more and more people to just stay away. So with all this hate that was coming in before their big release, the mob game developers would actually release a full-blown apology statement that regarded both the NFT controversy and the Ecker Coaster drama in full. They ended up taking full accountability for the NFTs, and in fact, they claimed that all the money that they made from them was going to be donated to the Clean Air Task Force organization to make up for the environmental impacts they must have had. And as for the Ecker Coaster dramas, they directly apologized to Coaster for a lot of the stuff, and while the apology was noticeably cherry-picked and people were suspecting that this was to cover everything up before the Chapter 2 release date, it was clear that at least in some regards, the developers were feeling remorse for their actions. They would make Chapter 1 free alongside the upcoming Chapter 2 release, which sparked a bit of controversy again from the fans who already paid for the game. Although I don't think you can really complain about a game being free. I mean, it's better than it costing money. But controversies aside, on May 6th of 2022, Poppy Playtime Chapter 2 would be released to an even more explosive response from the fans. The game would peak on Steam with over 13,000 concurrent players, and the fan community for this game was growing incredibly large. The second chapter was so much bigger, and rather than being a tech demo, there was a real game to be played here. The second chapter picked up where the first one left off, and the player then meets the Poppy doll herself again, where she leads them through the factory until being captured by this chapter's main antagonist, Mommy Longlegs. And after being captured, we are tasked with both saving the Poppy doll from Mommy and figuring out the code to activate the train inside of the game station to hopefully escape. We complete these tasks by doing mini games that Mommy Longlegs forces us to endure, all the way until she gets angry with our success and attempts to take us out herself, which is actually where we would end up destroying her and killing her, and then at the end of the chapter we are met with Poppy once again. We end up successfully starting the train where we're able to escape until the end where it crashes abruptly, stopping Chapter 2 and presumably starting Chapter 3. This second chapter proves something to everybody who played it, and it's that there is a lot of passion being put into this game. People are still critical of the game to this day, but something that everybody has failed to deny is that Poppy Playtime is not just a lazily put together game. It's actually pretty good, and it combines great animation, great gameplay, and great story to create everything that we have so far, and it seems to be being done pretty well. However, despite the love for the game that seems to have been redeemed from the second chapter, the damage from this controversy is done. And while Poppy not only deemed itself as a new light in the tunnel for indie horror, it has also now became known for its incredible amount of flaws with the game developers and the story leading up to where we are now. The game went from a viral success to a ruined reputation of a game to where we are now, a controversial yet highly admired video game that still has so much more room to grow in the future. And in terms of what happens in the future, I guess we'll just have to wait and see what comes next.